Great. I think we can go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Audrey Morrell. I have the honor of serving as the acting dean at the University of Pittsburgh's Honors College. I'm also an affiliate of the David Berg Center for Ethics and Leadership and a professor of business administration at Pitt. I also am the chair of the board for Food 21. And so we're so excited about the opportunity to start this conversation about looking at issues related to how we understand and how we analyze, how we gather data and apply that data to make more resilient food communities. And so I'm joined here by an amazing group of co-conspirators in this journey to talk about a project that started 10 years ago. And so I'm going to get started first by giving some background, and then we're going to have a demonstration of an exciting tool that we've been working on, and then open up and leave plenty of time in the end for questions and answers. And so I'm going to start off by asking Greg and Ray and Alec and Sam to introduce themselves. And by briefly, I mean like 5 seconds, so everybody knows who you are, and then we'll get started. So Greg, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Greg Bolus. I'm a farmer in Allegheny County, just outside of Pittsburgh.
Thank you. Ray.
I'm Ray Jones. I'm a professor at Pitt Business, and let's see, I was involved in the beginning of this project, and then I'm really heavily involved in the next steps as we take this to following up on this great work. Thank you.
Excellent. Sam, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Sam Rose, Director for the Center for Data Analytics and Strategy at Food 21 of Pennsylvania.
Excellent. Alec?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Firestein. I'm a sophomore in the University of Pittsburgh Honors College.
Terrific. Thank you all for joining me here. And so, Greg, I'm going to start with you because when we first met, and this has taken us back probably about 12 years, so this is a quiz for you to remember, we were together on a project where we were examining the need for a grocery store in the Hill District. I'm not sure if you remember how that's actually how you and I first met. We were working as judges on a competition to pitch ideas about the need for a grocery store. I don't know if you remember that. You were working with Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, if I'm not mistaken, at that time, right?
Yeah, that's right. And one of our roles at PASA was to investigate and research regional food infrastructure so that we could help advise farmers in how to enter the local food market. And what we saw was that some of the USDA funding that was coming out at the time had special credit for communities that were designated as a food desert, and that the expense for a community to do a food desert assessment was pretty high to have a consultant come in. And our conversation, I think, started out as how can we develop a tool that the communities and the nonprofit organizations can use in order to assess their food desert status. And then it evolved pretty quickly, and how can we go above and beyond just a food desert and get a community up to food abundance.
Right. And I remember you saying, I remember we had the most amazing conversation, and you said, everybody talks about food deserts, but there's no agreement about what that means. Everybody uses that term, they use that concept, but it can mean vastly different things, and there's no standard out there, not only when it comes to the industry standard, but when it comes to how we do community and economic development about what does a food desert mean. And so it's wildly divergent. And I remember us talking through that. And then I said, we've got to do a project about this, because there's no way we can create change or impact if we don't even agree on what the definition is of this concept, right?
Sure, it's a moving target. It's a very complicated arrangement to have food coming into a community and to have food distribution and food production. And so being able to identify the weaknesses and the strengths of a community, it was just a complete kind of crapshoot, a scattershot approach at how communities were being assessed, whether it was just on retail establishments, whether it was on how on bus transportation routes to get to have food access points, whether the food banks were using that community or had pantry distribution within certain communities. And so it was very hard to determine, what does food desert mean? Does it mean you don't have a community garden? And so so for us, it was it was good that we were able to focus on a set of criteria and then to build a tool which you guys have taken and evolved and even used a lot in the Pittsburgh area to do the assessments that were necessary for every one of the communities in the region.
And I remember it really struck me, and this is going to be really important as I pull Ray in here and talk about how we got the students involved, because one of the things that you really honed in on was that, yeah, you can talk about the presence of food in a particular community, but there were two particular dimensions rather that you honed in on. One was quality, and the other was affordability.
Yeah.
That just putting in a high-end store doesn't help people if they can't access that store. And then putting junk in a community, there could be food, and I'm using that in the loosest of definition, but that doesn't mean quality. And you can't talk about access alone without talking about those other dimensions. And so it really was a challenge as to how do we talk about this in a multi-dimensional, complex way.
Exactly.
So I did what I usually do when I'm trying to solve a difficult problem. I pull my ever partner in crime and collaborator Ray Jones in, and so I literally, I don't know if you remember this, I literally brought the Berg Center team out to your farm at, what was it, Ray? It was like
7 a.m. 7 a.m. And there's no Panera on the way to that, by the way, for coffee. Sorry.
And so we literally started at the farm and then went to the farm stand, and then we were partnering with our collaborators in Eden Park and went out to their headquarters and actually went and had lunch where we had food from that farm at Eden Park. And so, Ray, talk about the role that the students played
Yes.
and kind of how we dug into this, because that's a really important piece to this.
Yeah, so the great opportunity we had then to bring this into a student project is that we have a program in Pitt Business undergraduate, the certificate program in leadership and ethics that Audrey and I have been involved with since the beginning, going on 20 years now. Okay? And these are students from all across the business school with interests in marketing, finance, accounting, global management, people who do like analytics stuff, and people who do stuff on the creative side. Right? So the idea of putting together, right, this scorecard of studying, right, of actually going in and studying the access to healthy food and affordable food in a neighborhood was an excellent opportunity for a class of 25 students, right, to go in and to actually get on the ground in several neighborhoods, right, and do the initial pilot test and data collection for that, right. And again, students with different areas of training and expertise, right, bring all different things from how this is designed to what needs to be done. And then we thought about, okay, so then how can we scale this so that others can use it? And that was the thing that got it to be really interesting with this, particularly then as we've evolved into the future. Okay? So this is an ongoing thing. And in fact, what I love about today, right, is that we got to bring in additional partners, additional people out there, additional sources of data, and additional ways of using this in different ways. And then our students get engaged around that because they want to do this and they want to go out and make that happen.
And and one of the things we talked about it, and Greg really pushed you and I on this when we were designing the students' involvement, is that let's not create a tool. There was a tool that was being used in another part of the U.S. that involved really sophisticated GIS mapping, and it was complicated, expensive, and people at the community level could not use it.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things as we were talking to the students who literally went on the ground in neighborhoods, is that we cannot have something that's unreachable for people who are trying to be part of the solution within the community. And so the students really were tasked to not just go and collect measures, but to give us pushback, which they did. We actually did some revisions to the initial version of it based on the student feedback, didn't we?
Yes. And again, it was based on this. In fact, I remember this. Yeah, you really pushed them on the idea of a scorecard, right? Okay, so a scorecard. So again, imagine doing something like this in a comprehensive way, where, like you said, you could have mapping and pages and pages of data, but yet that couldn't be replicated by others. A scorecard model, right, in which this can be done by checking off several different areas and getting a comprehensive view, is in fact something that community organizers of all types could in fact do. Yeah. So that was an absolutely a big part of this, and why we went with the scorecard approach as opposed to the heavy data analytic approach at that time.
And we selected a range of neighborhoods and we sent the students through there with this draft. And that draft of the Food Abundance Index, or what we like to call the FAI, was really us pulling together all of the different ways that different entities, both on the research side and on the practice side. And we came up with these key dimensions: access, diversity, quality, density, and affordability. And one of the things that was interesting during our initial creation of this is that, and Greg, you were really, really pushed the envelope here, that we shouldn't just measure what is, that the scorecard shouldn't just be descriptive, it should also be prescriptive. So we should embed within the different levels, within the different dimensions, levels that go from things that you do that are required to things that are suggested to things that are innovative, right? And that was where we could see, if we're doing something in a community and it's working, can we incentivize communities or neighborhoods to put other things in there that are different and necessary? And so say something about that being more prescriptive, Greg. Give some thought, because you were really clear on that. I remember I was like, okay, let's just go with these 5 dimensions and then we're done. It's like, no, we have an opportunity here to drive change using the scorecard.
Exactly. So community members will logically start to ask questions whenever their score appears on the scorecard as to how can I improve it? And so having those links to additional ideas and additional projects that can be included within a community to improve the community's scorecard makes it an evolving document, and it makes it a tool that the community uses to guide itself towards food abundance.
And so we actually, based on that, constructed the tool. The students went out there, and then we actually brought 2 other people on board. So I really want to acknowledge Jasneet Sharma, who was a research associate for the Berg Center, and Chris Welch, who actually did some of the neighborhoods. So the students did the initial assessment, and then we went back with the revised tool. And then we wrote this paper. So Ray, let's talk about the paper that we did. Everybody got a copy of that when they registered. And we've actually gotten, what's nice about it is I've actually gotten emails from people, even outside of the US, talking about this from a research to practice standpoint. Why is that important that we were doing something across both of those divides? Give me a sense.
So, my simple take on that again is why we have the Berg Center, right? So, as you well know, people, right? I mean, there's a big academic study out there on issues of business ethics and corporate social responsibility, and you can bring in, lots of interesting academic perspectives on that from sociology, philosophy, and things like that, right? But what brings this to life, right, is that when you get into and look at something like the FAI, right, you start to make a case and say, right, what does social responsibility actually mean, right, for food producers in these various neighborhoods, right? Why is it that they should pay attention to providing affordable sources of food? Why is it, right? What impact will that have both on the community and to their customer base? And, if you want to go cynical, like, oh, what's their PR and things like that, right? But again, it pushes you to think about the practical application of social responsibility and this idea of ethical responsibility to communities, to neighborhoods, to customers, right? And actually operationalize it in a way that business students, whether it's our undergraduates, whether it's MBAs, and even the executives that we work with, right, and all the ways in which we do things, when we say to them social responsibility, it means something, and it means something very specific and can be measured and tracked and traced.
I think that's a really important point, because one of the things that I think that is important about the FAI is it was something that was done not for communities, but with communities. We got a lot of input. We gathered a lot of stakeholders. We listened to a lot of people as we were constructing this. The students who were on the ground gave us on the ground feedback about, look, I know that this is sort of the academic standard of how to measure this, but it's not practical when you're out there trying to collect the information. And then when we got the revised version back, just that you're saying, we were like, okay, let's push the envelope. Does it meet academic standards? But it is also practical. Is it accessible? Is it usable? Is it impactful for what is going to create actual change in building more resilient communities? Otherwise, it's not going to be effective. It'll just be an article on the shelf, which is fine, but it doesn't have impact that way. And then I remember we hosted an event in the Hill District where we brought a bunch of people together and we distributed that tool and and the manual and said, basically take this and break it, right? Use it. Let's get into some use and some application, which some people did. And so I think, Ray, it goes exactly to your point that it's got to be something that's livable and usable, which is what we wanted for the FAI.
And then the last thing I'll say on that is, again, that's also the future of it, right? Is that we want to continue to do that. We want to continue to do research, but again, it needs to be something that can be taken out in the community with data that's relevant for various business outcomes, for various social outcomes, and everything of the like. So again, that's why I'm here with great enthusiasm to say, what's the 2021 project? Ready?
Absolutely. So let's talk about the future. Let's bring Alec and Sam into this conversation, because again, the initial scorecard was really on the boots on the ground sort of process that was going community by community. But the access to data and data analytics tools have evolved so much in that 10-year period. And so Alec, why don't I start? Why don't I pick on you first? Tell me something about what got you involved in the food project and what attracted you to be involved in the FAI. And I'm going to turn things over to Sam so that he can run with the demo. But give us a little sense as to how I so easily, and I mean easily, convinced you to be part of this project as a student at Pitt.
Yeah, definitely. So just a little bit of background to kind of contextualize my involvement specifically. I was kind of one of the pilot programs in the new scholar community at Pittsburgh that focuses on researching food ecosystems within the Pitt Honors College that Dean Morell helped identify. But when I first got to Pitt, kind of as a freshman, I had experience volunteering in food distribution. In high school, I was really inspired by my grandfather, who did a lot of food distribution specifically. When I got to Pitt, I joined an analytics organization, and I kind of saw the ability of analytics to incite change. So when Dean Morell kind of came to me with this idea of, okay, how can we bring kind of the Food Abundance Index and data analytics together? How can we use data analytics to help make the Food Abundance Index even more effective than it already was? And that kind of really inspired me, because you're able to create an impact, but also leverage these skills I'm learning in my classes. I'm also a part of the certificate program in leadership and ethics that Professor Jones kind of referenced earlier, and just kind of focusing on this like corporate social responsibility and focusing on how we can really promote this sustainable food and resilient food systems within different communities is really attractive to me specifically.
Excellent. So let me turn things over to Sam. So we've been talking about this tool, but let's talk about the Food Abundance Index 2.0. And so I'm going to turn things over to Sam and Alex so they can walk us through what that looks like and all the work that they've been doing. So take it away, Sam.
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you very much. Alex is actually going to do a demonstration of the work that he and I did starting right around last year at this time, where Alex basically took the lead on processing the existing Food Abundance Index that all three of you and other colleagues created, and lined it up as a specification that could be digitized. And so I think probably the most effective thing to do would be, at this point, Alex, if you can go ahead and just show us basically what he and I created. Also, I will mention that long ago when you all worked this out with Greg, I was meeting in parallel with Greg, and Greg shared a lot of dreams that he had about data gathering that basically look like what you're about to see. So it's interesting that this all has come together now. But go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sam. So as Sam kind of mentioned, for the past about 10 months, him and I have been working in conjunction to co-design and develop this kind of food abundant communities assessment, this data analytics tool in order to kind of measure food insecurity based on a lot of the core parameters of the Food Abundance Index. Dean Morell mentioned them earlier. They're affordability, access, diversity, density, and quality. And we kind of took those parameters and have them be the foundation specifically of this new data application tool. But first, there's a lot of talk about the scorecard specifically with the Food Abundance Index. That's one of the portions of the application we're going to take a look at first. And so this specifically mimics the exact scorecard that was in the original Food Abundance Index. And this is what Professor Jones was talking about, focusing on like equity specifically. And this synthesizes all the data that we collect within this tool, whether it be the data that we import from the US Census, so the Western PA Regional Data Center, or the data that's collected on the ground by people going into stores and conducting surveys. That we've also digitized that survey methodology where they can just enter different access points in specifically, and it all gets aggregated to this specific area. In addition, another dimension that we've kind of built out is this survey aspect. And that's the third kind of fundamental component of this application, is getting those in-depth community responses within this survey data, this collection methodology. So currently we have two dimensions built out. We have the access dimension, which was talked about earlier. And we also have the density dimension specifically. And those really heavily rely on kind of the food outlet presence within the communities. And in order to get a better visualization of kind of what these data dimensions really look like, we can transition over to the map software specifically. And so this visualization here focuses primarily on the density, and this encompasses all the food outlets within a specific region. And as you can see, this is the point right here, and then just kind of the different areas around the three rivers that collide within Pittsburgh specifically. And it's interactive, so each food outlet, each dot represents a food outlet specifically. And if we select each food outlet, we can see it's going to tell us, okay, what type of food outlet is it, the name, the zip code specifically. And it also corresponds to the surveying methodology that I'm going to get into a little later in the presentation, where it shows, okay, what percentage of people in this zip code use this store as their primary food outlet, where they get a majority of their food from. And so this correlates directly to the density portion of the scorecard, because density was all about calculating ratios. It calculates, okay, how many convenience stores do we have in the community related to how many grocery stores do we have? And it calculates those and awards scores based on those ratio calculations specifically. For the scorecard, as you can see, we calculated the density ratios, and it shows a pretty poor performance, but this looks at regionally. And within this tool, we have the ability to scope in and scope out, either focusing specifically on a small community, or we can go even to a broader context and look at the entire region. Another interesting dimension I'll show you is access, and this one's really cool. So this is our study area specifically. We looked at these couple of zip codes, and this map shows, it's kind of cluttered, but it shows specifically the transportation stops in correspondence with the primary food outlet types. So the ones we look at usually are supermarkets, grocery stores, and limited assortment stores in Pittsburgh. I'll remove the stops just so you can see. And so each of these corresponds to a food outlet within the community. And when you click on it, you can see all the walking distance stops that are related to that food outlet. These are stops that are within a quarter mile and are accessible by public transportation. And this assessment seeks to decide, okay, we have a food outlet within a community, but if nobody can get to it via public transportation, how are they going to be able to access that food specifically? So that's kind of one of the questions we wanted to answer. And this focuses a lot on the access dimension of the scorecard, particularly the first dimension, which awards points based on the amount of grocery stores in a community specifically that have public transportation stops within walking distance. Just as an example, we can bring back these public transportation stops, and we can see that if a food outlet within a community does not have any public transportation stops, it will be marked red. And it's easy to identify, okay, which are the food outlets that we need to kind of address and focus on as far as like access for public transportation. And finally, I've kind of referenced it a little bit, but this was a new dimension that we've kind of added to the Food Abundance Index throughout Sam and I's process, and that's the community survey. If you click on the zip code specifically, it does this survey response and shows how many respondents within that particular zip code use public transportation to their primary food outlet specifically. And so if we look at this zip code, this is all kind of mock survey data. None of this is real data yet collected by the survey. But if we have a region like this region, where if say this region were primarily public transportation, if a lot of the respondents were like, yeah, I use the bus to get to my primary food outlet, but the primary food outlet doesn't have any public transportation stops, that shows an issue. And that's just kind of a demonstration of how this tool can really emphasize these issues in the different communities. So finally, I'll dive into kind of the survey portion to go do a brief overview. But pretty much this is the community food abundance survey specifically. And a lot of these questions that were developed for the survey correspond to the original 5 parameters of the Food Abundance Index. Kind of one of the things we wanted to focus on is this equitable data collection. And a big role of the survey is to provide support to different dimensions of the Food Abundance Index that might not be achievable within the current context. The COVID-19 pandemic has made going into grocery stores and doing hour-long surveys of all the inventory pretty difficult and a risk specifically. So by using the survey to kind of support that, by having people report, okay, this is what the store had, this is what the store didn't have, this is what I purchased when I went there, this is what I didn't purchase when I went there, it gives us good insight into what the stores possess without us having to go in and risk getting like the COVID-19 disease. And specifically focusing on how we can make it more accessible when we calculate these different dimensions. And so that was a lot of information, but we also use this specifically when we tie it and we export it to this superset data that I'm going to show you, and Sam's going to present specifically, where we can kind of synthesize it with public health data, and we can synthesize it with a lot of the demographic data to really get a holistic view of the region specifically, which we'll be using when we do a report on Mid-Mon Valley analysis. So I'd like to turn it over to Sam to kind of talk about the outputs of the Food Abundance Index and kind of the impact that this tool can have.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'll just quickly describe this. That we moved quickly from what Alex just showed you to a pilot project to focus on an area where Food 21 is quite active in applying Food 21 solutions to food security and food economy development solutions. And so what we did, what you see here, is we were able to take the data that's published on a monthly basis that comes from Western PA Data Center, and in turn they're sourcing it from the health department. We're able to recategorize it into the Food Abundance Index food outlet categories, but we were also able to focus on, this is one of the challenges, is there's not a lot of data that's readily available in the public space that focuses on like a census tract or a zip code um, level of resolution. So we were able to do that with a district that we call the Mid-Mon Valley. It constitutes about 7 zip codes, and we have a bunch of projects in Food 21 that are active in this area. So we decided to try to apply some of the, where we have existing data available, we decided to apply some of the analysis from the Food Abundance Index, following the Food Abundance Index categorization and methods. Here you can see our findings are that there's a preponderance of restaurants and limited service restaurants and convenience stores. But also so this is giving us a clue right away on what's going on in this region. But Alex, if you could scroll down a bit and see here that we're also looking at employment in all the food economy sectors, where we're pulling in from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics from the government. And if you keep going down here, Alex, we've got from the same Western PA data set that comes from Allegheny County, we can show the business start dates and closing dates for food outlets. So if you keep going down here, Alex, we're mixing in data from partners like Chatham University that look at food processors and craft food producers. And all of this is focusing on, we wanted to see what can we see in these zip codes for the Mid-Mon Valley that will give us a clue and that will about the state of food security and the food economy in this location. And it turns out there's a lot of data, and we think that we can answer a lot of questions right now about what kind of investment should be made in this community, how we can engage with the community to try to improve the situation. Although to Ray's point earlier, and to the point that Alex had in helping to bring surveying into the picture in the Food Abundance Index, our next step is that we hope to be able to carry out ongoing surveying in these districts like this Mid-Mon Valley district. So we're hoping to find partners out there that have a lack of access to data on this resolution of like census tract or zip code level, that we can team up with and carry out this surveying ongoing. This is pretty much how the US Census does it, but the US Census can't zoom in on a monthly basis and gather this data. And this is really the final, last mile for us to be able to get most, if not all, the data that we'll need to answer most of the questions about food security and food abundance if we focus on a district by district level like this. So this is an example of what we're doing. You're going to see a report come out in about a week here from Alex and I that describes this in detail. This dashboard will also go live at that time. But we just wanted to give you an example about how we're taking the existing food abundance approach and mixing in data from multiple partners and multiple sources to get a richer view that builds on the foundation of Food Abundance Index.
Thanks, Sam. Alex. What do you think, Greg? That looks a lot different than where we started 10 years ago. What do you think?
Yeah, it does.
So I think I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I remember that conversation as well, Sam. I'm surprised that it just all came together. It's amazing.
It did.
It took 10 years.
And so it's good. There's some questions in the chat that I want to get to. Sam, were you getting ready to say something?
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So one of the questions that that was answered is how does this scorecard differ from other tools like the FCS and the FRAC score? So the FCS is the food consumption scorecard, and that's really focused on just specifically what is being consumed by households in terms of food. And then the other one is the FRAC, which is, comes out of being able to measure the reach of school breakfast programs. And so I think that what the FAI does, and one of the methodologies that we mimicked, actually, that we adopted, was from the LEED certification for communities. People know LEED certification for buildings, green building designation. but LEED was also piloting at the time a certification for designating communities using the scorecard methodology. And so what the scorecard methodology allows us to do is to combine across some of these other measures, which may look at one aspect like, what's the reach of school breakfasts, and embed that as another dimension of access. So it allows multi levels of analysis to be able to use, which was one of the things that in that original conversation in creating the FAI that Greg brought to our attention, is that everybody's measuring one piece of the pie and there's nothing that's creating a much more holistic approach. And so that's what the FAI is trying to do. But it was interesting when we were first piloting it and when we sent the students out, one of the things that we were plagued by was not enough data and information to get at transportation. And so one of the things that the data analytics tool that Sam and Alec have built is that it allows to pull other data in. And this is really important, real-time data, right? So it allows them to go out and collect real-time data on dimensions that would have been really labor intensive for us to do, on the ground, if you will. And I think that that's a huge advantage. And then this is a question I'm going to throw out to the group, because I'm not sure if I had I have a good answer to. Do we have a plan for collecting responses from residents without internet access? And so I know we've got that survey and other things. So Sam, Alec, you want to jump in and give us your thoughts on that? So to what extent is this adaptable or accessible if you don't have internet access? What do you think?
I think, Greg Boulos knows that in the past, we've had these challenges when surveying farmers who may not have access to internet. And really you have to work with partners, and you're going to have to identify where those constituents are and have a systematic approach, just like we did in the farm world. So we may have to send people to work with them, or we may work with partners that are on the ground that can actually work with, gather that data in. And if we want it to be more scientific and academic publishing worthy, then we need to have a systematic way of doing it.
I agree with what you're saying. This is where particularly, so this is where when we start looking at particularly going into more rural areas, and this was one of the things I have to tell you, when Alec first showed me that survey, I was like, wait a minute, I thought we were just going to go and reach out into the cloud and pull data from places and do some really nice Tableau fancy, and he's like, no, but there's still going to be a need for us to be able to collect user and community based data. And Alec, I remember that conversation in my office, because you pushed that really hard about that importance about getting user level data inputted to this, and not just grab what's already out there. You want to weigh in on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And I can kind of touch on to some of the methods we're going to use to overcome the challenge of internet access. Because I know when we present that to a bunch of different constituents, that's one of the biggest questions that comes up, because we don't want to have a tool that focuses on providing equity that's not equitable, right? So I think I'll address the question first specifically. There are a bunch of, as Sam said, a lot of community partners that we can become involved with that really help outreach to those specific communities that may not have internet access. And I think Sam kind of mentioned the first part of that is identifying those specific areas. And I think that's not only valuable to us, but valuable to any sort of data collection holistically. And I'm sure there's a lot of avenues out there that we can take to identify regions that don't have specific access to internet. And that's ever more apparent, especially in the new virtual learning environment. I know that problem has come up a lot when it comes to virtual education. And then with food systems specifically, a lot of the surveying methodologies we kind of decided to do, and this is an idea I've been running by Sam kind of more recently, is that focusing on a lot of people who are really affected by this. As you can see, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there's like people who are lining up outside of food banks waiting for food. And that's, while as unfortunate as it is to see these lines, there's an excellent opportunity to collect data there. There's an excellent opportunity to, while people are waiting in line, go up, okay, can you answer these 5 questions real quick about your condition, about your current living status? And just really being able to collect that data from these people that are already going to the food bank to collect their food. And while they're waiting, in order to be able to collect kind of this information, really from these people that are experiencing these high levels of food insecurity specifically. Another kind of partnership avenue that we can focus on is these looking at kind of primary food outlets within the community. Oftentimes in these more rural communities, it's like one food outlet that you have to travel many miles for. So even placing someone at those food outlets and surveying people that come in will help effectively address, it won't address specifically those without internet access, but it'll help mitigate the barriers to entry that having just an online survey might possess specifically.
And there,
No, that's terrific. Yeah, go
there-
ahead, Sam.
there definitely can be internet access issues within the city as well. So it's not just limited to rural. And I found that in other projects I've worked on where we've done surveying in the community, like AIDS and HIV prevention. And so there again, we had success working with partners that were already embedded in the community who were already connecting with those constituent participants. So I thought I would acknowledge that it's not just rural, but it's both really. But we definitely need to rise to that challenge in multiple ways.
Yeah.
There's some other great things in the chat. What somebody Sarah asked, how does the food security survey align that they use with screenings at medical offices? And one of the things about the access dimension, and this was something that Greg and Ray and I talked a lot about in the original construction of the FAI. We actually used a lot of the USDA guidelines to be able to determine particularly access, but it's actually true across all the dimensions. So where there were USDA guidelines and parameters and methodologies for defining those different dimensions, we relied heavily on them because everybody agreed that that was sort of the baseline standard in terms of how to define those dimensions. And so to the extent that the food security survey that's used in medical care offices aligns with USDA guidelines, then the dimensions of the FAI would line up. But remember, the FAI is about neighborhoods or communities, whereas I think, and I'm not the expert on it from the medical standpoint, the food security survey is much more about individuals and individual households. So I do think that there's a role for both of them. Again, that's kind of where I would go. I think we answered the question. I guess we answered Adam's question about COVID, but Joe wants to know from Sam and Alec, is there a mobile app to be able to widen data collection? So what do you think about mobile app capabilities at some point, or is that FAI 3.0?
Well, yeah, it could be all or any of the above, and we definitely have the dream of bringing it's not too hard for us to bring a mobile app into this at this point with the application that you saw Alex demonstrate. On top of that, we've talked and explored and found it's feasible to conduct some of this through SMS text messaging, automated phone menu driven systems, online chat systems. So all of this, of course, requires that you have access to those devices, of course, but we've explored and found that we could drive this through all of those mediums in addition to just the web interface. Definitely, we're hoping that by this time next year, we've made progress on those fronts.
Excellent. What do we wish we had data about that's not currently within the FAI? And this is for anybody. What's our wish list that, if we could add something to it that's currently either not there or we haven't gotten to, is not available, what would it be? And then I see a question from or a point from Cindy in the chat that I want to get to after we talk about this. What's on our wish list here, guys? And I mean guys in sort of a generic form.
From my end, one of our biggest challenges has been to figure out, like on the retail level, what people are buying. And Food 21 is working with partners to try to have access to that. It's a massive challenge and it's an expensive set of data to try to procure. And also, we heard in the last webinar, in the last Food 21, in the last partnership webinar here that people were seeking data that has the resolution of census tract and zip code level. And really, you can see that in the 10-year census, but on a monthly basis, it's really difficult for people to produce and publish that data. And that's one of the challenges that I'm hoping that everyone in the Allegheny County community can get together and try to solve. I think the amount of resources it would take to tackle that would not be as much as it may seem. And so I'm hoping we can find a pathway to combine forces and start to do that in 2021. I'm hoping that.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be especially true. And Greg, you know this better than anybody. When you start getting into, I mean, it's one thing to measure this within Allegheny County, but when you start talking about more remote and more rural areas, give us some thoughts there.
I mean, we're lucky to get the data set from Chatham, who is focused specifically on regional agriculture and figuring out where the production is happening within our region here around Pittsburgh. But exactly, if once you start to move outside of our region or even into other cities, other types of organizations that are collecting that same data in different ways need to be integrated into the back end of the food abundance index so that those data sets can be used. But there's very little common ground in tracking agricultural production information.
That's a really good point because, you know, one of the hopes, and when Ray and I were talking about the construction of the scorecard and looking at different methodologies for doing this, is something that would not only shape practice, but would shape policy, right? And so what you're talking about would be really important in shaping what policy looks like. You know, having that data, you know, to be infused in this would be really important for that, Greg. It's a really good point.
For sure. What we've seen actually is as a business, we produce seedlings that we sell to gardeners and to even to community levels. And we're seeing sales off the chart. There's folks who are contacting us now to contract with us for seedlings for gardens in 2021. And so I think that these initiatives that are happening through like a Reimagine type program or a Transition Towns type of initiative where there are community members focused on particular types of food projects and solving local food projects within their community. You know, like the gardeners are getting together, the urban chicken folk, they're getting together. People are talking about how to achieve food security as a backyard production thing, at least for vegetables and for light proteins. You know, no one's doing backyard cows yet or backyard deer. We'll get there.
Yeah, this is called the Food Abundance Index, not the Moo Abundance Index. Okay, that was a little farm joke. No. Ray gave me the thumbs down for that. Here's an interesting question. Have you tested the index for communities with high food access to ensure validity? My understanding
Yes.
is that we did that, you know, with known food deserts. And so, yes, you are right that is the paper that we sent out was just looking at the pilot data. And so what happened after the pilot data is that we actually contracted with some research assistants to actually go out and to take the data from the revised food abundance index, which was based on the pilot, and then collect data on every single neighborhood within Pittsburgh. So we actually do, based on at least the original food abundance index before it got infused with the analytics from every single neighborhood. And so you would see in that larger data a broader distribution across the categories, not just those neighborhoods that were known food deserts. Ray, you want to chime in?
No, and I was going to say, I mean, like, you know, that was always the example we used because when we were designing it, I live in Etna, right? You know, north of Pittsburgh, and you know, which is probably like mid-range in the scale, but like a couple neighborhoods up from me is Aspinwall, right? And Aspinwall is like off the charts in access to food and different sources and things like that. You know, hit a little bit on the affordability side because the food can be expensive there, but you definitely see the differences both, you know, at looking at the tool and then also when you apply it to specific neighborhoods. Yeah.
Right. No, I think that, and again, you know, the next step would have been to try to see how could we widen it beyond the greater Pittsburgh metro area, but the infusion of all the data analytics gives the ability to go capture data at a much wider scale. And this is going to be really important too, real-time data, right? So doing things on the ground, particularly when you're collecting it, gives you a time and just an embedded time lag in terms of the methodology. What Alec and Sam have built allows us to be able to update the FAI on certain key dimensions in a much quicker, a much real-time way. And so I think that will be important, particularly as interventions happen, you can actually track the change of them. So in one of the projects that we could do that we're looking at doing within the city, we could actually go back and take the original FAI score for that neighborhood within the city of Pittsburgh and look at what's happened over time now that we can collect it on a quicker basis. Joe's got a question in here that Sam indicated the opportunity to opportunity challenge to get real-time data, do we think we can bring in some regional partners into this discussion and to share their real-time information? Sam, what do you think about Joe's question?
Well, I mean, absolutely. That's literally the next step for us. We want to finish our report here and get it out to folks on the Mid-Mon Valley, but the very next step for us is literally to try to act on what you and Ray and Greg have been talking about here just a moment ago, about how we can literally get as many of partners who care about food security in the region involved in gathering data. And really, we need to work out the question that Audrey asked, which is, what data do you need? And we heard from some people this time and in the last session about what data they're looking for. And we hear that on a frequent basis in Food 21 Center for Data Analytics and Strategy. People come to us with questions quite frequently. And we're seeing that people are recreating wheels and probably don't want to. And so we're looking now to say, how can we connect together and gather this data and get all the information that everyone needs to succeed in their efforts. So data can really be an organizing kind of North Star rallying, centralizing point around collaboration in the region around these food security issues. We really think it can, that it can help us cut to the chase and understand probably what solutions are going to work. So that data can basically turn into information and knowledge to help coordinate people's actions. So that's the reason why we came up with this approach, to see if we can combine the FAI data with other data sources. And it gives us the capability to then integrate the data that other groups are gathering and give back knowledge and information back to them that's useful for their efforts to solve these problems.
Right.
Absolutely. I think I'm looking at that as the very next step that we're going to try to take in this.
So one of the questions in the chat is a really good segue into Sam, what you just said, into the answer of what's next. There's a lot of questions in the chat. Are you working with this entity, that entity, that entity? And what I want to say is that the whole creation of the Food Abundance Index 10 now, plus years ago, started with, key partnerships. Yes, the Berg Center was a partner and sat at the table with Food Policy Council, and we talked to people from corporate to community in the construction, right? And then we went into this process of validating the tool and now infusing just amazing data analytics. And Cindy's question is, is there an opportunity for the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank to be able to partner on what's next, in terms of now it's a time to sort of flesh and to see what other data, what other questions, what other uses for this. And so we set up this webinar just to give a basic overview. And on December 7th at noon, we're going to host a conversation for anybody that has data, wants data, is interested in sharing data, is interested in using the tool, is interested in collaborating further with this tool, to meet and for us to have what I'm nicknaming the Food Abundance Data Jam conversation. What is it that we can do next with this? Where else can we go? Alec and Sam talked about a pilot project of data looking at specifically at the Mon Valley, because that's one of the projects of Food 21. But how else can we partner? How else can we collaborate across other resources, other needs, other segments? And so everybody, as a follow-up from this conversation, who was on the call, is going to get a follow-up invitation to that session, December 7th at noon, to come and just have a facilitated conversation about how can we strengthen the ability to be able to collect data in a comprehensive, multi-dimensional, and I'm sorry, Greg, I got to go back to exactly what you said, in a prescriptive and not just a descriptive way, to help us build more resilient and abundant communities within our region and as a model for other places. And so this is my invitation and our invitation to all of you on the call, or other people that you might know who couldn't have dialed into this webinar, to join us December 7th at noon. You would get an invite with the information and how to register to come and to talk data and to discuss this in more detail. So I hope you'll join us. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to ask you, each one of the panelists, as the way to wrap up, to just give me a final thought about what is your hope in terms of us moving toward a more resilient food ecosystem within the region. And Sam, I'm going to start with you, And Greg, I'm going to end with you. So
Okay.
that'll give you a hint so you can get your answer prepared. So Sam, why don't you start? Give me a final thought.
And you've already heard much of what I hope, but I also hope that we can do exactly what Audrey talked about. And I'm hoping, Food 21 is really active in the Allegheny County area. We've got a lot of solutions on the ground, and I'm hoping that basically, if we are able to create a partnership around gathering this data and utilizing this data and turning it into analytic prescription, like Audrey talks about, we could immediately apply it to the solutions that we're putting on the ground now, and invite as many people that care to be partners in all of that, not just the data and the analytics and the prescriptive outcomes, but the actual work that we do in the communities. So I'm hoping that that's the total next step that we can take. Food 21 is ready to do this. It's ready to support integrating and collaborating with your data now, and also custom outcomes for folks that may need that. So we can talk about that in the next session, but that's my hope.
Absolutely. Alec, what do you think?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's been truly amazing kind of learning from everybody throughout this process. And as I mentioned, I'm only a sophomore at the University of Pittsburgh, and it's been really kind of rewarding learning a lot about the problems with the food system, specifically in our region and across the nation in general. But kind of one of the things I hope for, and just to kind of echo Sam, is that these key partnerships are essential to both creating an impact and developing this data collaboration, and just being able to access this truly important data that has potential to make an impact on the community. I think another key aspect, and one of the things that was mentioned earlier, is that the purpose of this initiative, the purpose of this tool is not to, from the outside perspective, assess the communities. It's not for the communities, it's with the communities. The communities are going to be involved in every step of the way. And the only way to do that is have these collaborations specifically within each community in order to really kind of talk and specifically network within those different regions to determine, okay, what are the specific issues that face us? Because there's going to be unique challenges in different areas. And that's my main hope, is that we can reach this collaborative entity.
That's terrific. I like that. Ray, what do you think?
Well, my whole thing is, like I said, we've got people ready to work on this, right? So, and then we'll have a team of students in our service learning class who are ready to follow up on a project. We have interns in the Berg Center that would be interested in doing something like this in the summer. So the word for me is stakeholders, right? I've seen some comments in the chat about, the possible sources of data from the food bank, some community organizers who want access to the data and want to make this stuff happen. This sounds great. And like you said, if you come on December 7th and when I know you'll be talking about the game plan, what's next, what are we doing moving forward? We have a long history of working with stakeholders, and we would welcome that. And we're ready to go for 2021. Thanks.
I love that. The magic word is stakeholders. Greg, I had to, this started with you. I had to have it in with you. You know that, right?
I still feel that, necessity is the mother of all invention here, that there's going to be so much, too many new tools and new types of data that are being developed over the next few years as our cultural norms shift and new technology is being pushed onto the marketplace, that we're going to be able to really integrate a lot more of the community organizations and a lot more of the different types of data sets that seem so disparate to what we're working on. Bus stops being included in a food study. I mean, we can bring in a lot of different information that's going to make communities see how well they are, or how much they need to improve towards getting towards food abundance. And if it can be applied on the regional scale, which it looks like that's our trajectory, Pittsburgh and the Allegheny in the region, could see that, we start to work from a planning standpoint, from the regional planners, whether it's somebody like the Allegheny Conference or another organization that has taken the helm of working with regional industry in order to develop things, can really make some conscious decisions about how to sequence the investment in certain areas and certain communities. I mean, Audrey, we can talk about that grocery store in the Hill District forever, but just throwing a solution at a problem doesn't always work. And so if we're able to have a conscious and deliberate effort to bring together enough information to make important decisions, I'm glad that this tool has evolved as far as it has, and I'm looking forward to seeing the impact that it starts to have on the region.
I can't thank the four of you enough, not only for being part of this webinar, but for all of the work that you've done and that we continue to do to be able to move the needle. I also want to thank our partners from Food 21 and the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, and all of the students and faculty and staff from Pitt Honors, and also from the Berg Center for digging in and working on this collaboration, not just to put on a webinar, but to really be a rallying call for partners to be able to work together, to be able to move the needle. And if you don't realize how important this is, I urge you to go to WQED's website and to watch the documentary film that they released a few weeks ago called Starved, and really look at the impact, not only the impact of food insecurity that existed before COVID, but the tremendous impact that COVID has produced on already communities that were that need. And so there's a need out there. We're committed to working together with partners. Please join us on the 7th of December. And if you have other questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, reach out to me and let's chat. Thank you. And again, have a great rest of the day.